All right, I think we're going to get started now. My name is Lindsay Holt. I'll be taking over for Kevin as the moderator for today's session. Um, on behalf of the New Jersey section of the American Water Works Association, thank you all for joining us for the Beyond the Surface webinar session 3, Differing Landscapes. This is the third session of 5, and today we'll be discussing the differing landscapes of utility size, service area, and community demographics on water utility operations. Throughout the webinar, you can use the Q&A feature to submit questions, and also feel free to use the React buttons. Both are located on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Rather than having a dedicated Q&A period, we'll be addressing questions as they come in, so feel free to submit those at any point, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. The main question that we're tackling today is, how do community size and demographics impact water utility operations through rates, affordability, and infrastructure funding? So to help us understand that question a little bit better, I'm pleased to introduce one of our panelists, Christina Patagna. Christina, you can take yourself off mute and turn your video on. Christina is the Mid-Atlantic Funding Navigator of Environmental Policy Innovation Center, and is going to take a few minutes to provide some background now for funding opportunities and considerations. Christina, let me just spotlight you for everyone, and then I will let you take it from here.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. We are an organization that uses sort of a holistic approach to improve aspects of water infrastructure. We focus on funding, lead service line replacement, and green stormwater infrastructure. And we do this by analyzing, the available data out there about, obstacles, barriers, what is working. We make policy recommendations at the federal and state level. And then my area, ground truthing it all through our experience with technical assistance. And so, you might be asking, what is technical assistance? I think the term gets thrown out a lot. I'm sorry, you can do the next slide. But TA, or technical assistance, it's always been around. It just, I think, really popped up a lot with the IIJA, BIL funding. EPA officially established various environmental finance centers to provide technical assistance. And, it's really to help water systems access funding, specifically the funding that is in the state revolving funds, which for New Jersey, if you're not aware, is the New Jersey Water Bank. There are 4 national environmental finance centers, including us. It's Moonshot Missions, U.S. Water Alliance, and RCAP. There's also a regional environmental finance center, that's Syracuse University. And then the great thing about New Jersey, the Water Bank recognizes how important technical assistance is and has its own technical assistance program. Anyone can apply to it, but if you're a disadvantaged community, you are also eligible for additional grant funding from the Water Bank. And so it's a really great resource, and great that the Water Bank recognizes that. So, with the ultimate goal being to help communities access infrastructure funding and kind of look at their long-term viability. Various, how the TA providers do that can kind of vary a little bit. So next slide, I can kind of talk about specifically how EPIC provides technical assistance. We are currently providing assistance in 24 different states and the Virgin Islands. Specifically in New Jersey, we work with New Jersey Future, our place-based partner. They understand the landscape the best, right? Because they're here representing the state on a policy level, as well as with their own funding navigator program. And so they help connect us with communities that need the assistance. So that's often very small systems or really under-resourced systems. And then our funding navigator managers, and for New Jersey, that's me. We have a lot of experience in various aspects of utility management. You can kind of think of us like the Swiss Army knives, so to speak. We have all the right tools to understand the problem and kind of get at what the right solution is to sort of get those applications moving. But we're not necessarily, heavy duty enough to implement the solutions, right? So we dive in with the community, we understand the problem, and then we create sort of a proposal for our 14 MSA engineering firms that we have. And we, bid out the work to them, and then they really dive in and get the project rolling and remove those barriers, whether it's an environmental review that has to occur or some aspect of the design, a PER, et cetera, So We're really using our funding to connect these small and under-resourced systems with these engineering firms to help eliminate those barriers to access the funding. Because I'm sure, as a lot of people on this webinar know, you kind of need money to get money. So what have we seen in our technical assistance work? What kind of projects are we helping out with? I'm sorry, next slide. A lot of times it is related to the lead service line projects, and not even just the replacement aspect. It can also be the inventory. That seems to be a really heavy lift for small systems. And actually, I'm sure even medium and large size systems are kind of seeing that burden a little bit. It's really hard to kind of get your ratepayers to either self-report, or there's a lot of records that have to be, you have to go through. A lot of times, some of our work is just digitizing tap cards, so that then we can use that as like a starting point for the inventory. And then, from there, if there are lead or galvanized lines that have to be replaced, we help a community come up with the replacement plan and the application to the water bank. Emerging contaminants, specifically PFAS, very similar story. A lot of times it's just that getting started part that is kind of a burden, right? So sampling, characterization testing, small systems don't really know where to begin, who to turn to, and so we connect them with the right firms and people, and then we'll help them get that application to the water bank. The other kind of aspect with all of our projects is community engagement. Small systems, they have one or two people who are wearing a lot of different hats. And so really engaging with ratepayers is so low on the priority list. But I think with things, they're finding with issues like PFAS, it's in the news, residents are kind of freaked out. They want to know, they want to understand what's going on. And so we sort of help put a community engagement plan together and help the community implement that so that they're starting to build a better relationship with their ratepayers. And they understand what is happening. And then, the last thing, not necessarily an SRF project, but certainly an area we've seen a growing need for assistance in is just utilities trying to understand what their long-term viability is. Maybe they haven't raised rates in 10 years and they're feeling a little bit behind, or with all the regulations that are, coming out, it's becoming more and more of a burden to make sure that they're meeting those, but then also just maintaining their everyday maintenance. And so, we've been doing a little bit of like alternatives analysis for some of these systems, rate studies. We've partnered with Moonshot Missions before to do, their TMF analysis so that a utility can kind of understand where their pain points are. And so, yeah, that's just kind of an example of a lot of the work that we're assisting these small and under-resourced systems with. And so kind of before the panel gets started, I want to leave you all with some considerations and thoughts about, what are common occurrences in this work? One of them, which I think maybe wasn't fully understood initially when these programs started, is how many systems are really hesitant to debt finance any of their projects. And a lot of that hesitancy is fed by a fear of raising rates and then the backlash that will occur because that's happening. And again, that kind of goes back to that community engagement aspect. They kind of work hand in hand. You want to, as a utility, it's really important to explain to the ratepayers, like why are the rates increasing? Why is this an investment? What does it take to make a utility run properly? And so again, just with not having the time necessarily to really think about that proactively, we really try to encourage, okay, that's one half of the battle, is like really engaging your ratepayers so that they understand why you do need to increase rates in order to like fund these major investments. And New Jersey Future, they've done a really great job. They have a series called Debt is Not a Bad Word, where they're trying to dispel a lot of the myths about, debt financing. And so the next one is on June 17th, and they're talking about, why is the SRF a great deal? Because it is, yeah, it might not be principal forgiveness or grants, but it is a great financing vehicle for getting these major capital projects done. And then sort of the other consideration is regional coordination, which, to be clear, I am not talking about consolidation at all. I'm talking about more like the small ways to sort of increase economies of scale. New Jersey has the cooperative purchasing program, so utilities can work together to, bulk purchase, treatment chemicals or something like that. Or there's the New Jersey LEAP program, sort of similar, where utilities or municipalities work together to jointly purchase like a truck or something that you don't necessarily need all the time, but it's still a big expense. And so that's just there's small ways to sort of increase that purchasing power, decrease costs, but still maintain utility autonomy, which I know is very important for a lot of systems. But with that, I hope those considerations kind of kick off a great panel discussion, and I'm excited to answer any questions that folks might have.
Great, thank you. That was really helpful. I know the funding conversation can be kind of overwhelming at times, and so it can just feel like there's just too much information available to even know where to go. So it's great to hear about the work that Epic's doing and the other collaboration opportunities and stuff like that. So I'm looking forward to hear from the rest of the panel on the topic. So with that, um, I'll ask the remaining panelists to turn on your cameras and your microphones. And let me just make you all add a spotlight to you all, and then I will get started. Um, all right. Um, I'm going to first introduce Eleni Giannakopoulos, Senior Associate and Client Development Department Manager at Suburban Consulting Engineers. Eleni has over 20 years of experience, and for the last 13 at Suburban has been focused on financial aspects of utilities, advancing capital improvement projects. She works with a wide variety of utilities throughout the state, assisting in determining the best funding opportunities for each. Next, we have Richard Phelan, Public Works and Business Administrator for the town of Clinton. Rich has worked in public works administration for 24 years, with 15 years focused on water. Clinton Water Department is a mid-sized system serving a population of 12,000 across 5 municipalities. So Rich has valuable experience managing client capital improvements and affordability. And then also joining us today is Kevin Rudier, Senior Engineering Program Manager at New Jersey American Water. Kevin has been with New Jersey American for 7 years, focused on growth and development over a variety of roles, most recently focused on small system acquisitions and bulk water sales, and will offer some perspectives from an investor-owned utility in our discussion. And finally, Christina will complete our panel. You've probably pieced this together already, but at Epic, Christina works with utilities throughout New Jersey, providing assistance navigating the funding process, and has lots of expertise in making the funding landscape more accessible, especially for small systems. Um, so thank you all for joining today and sharing your expertise with us. We have much more to talk about than we have time for, so we'll jump right in. And as a reminder for the attendees of the webinar, you can submit any questions through the Q&A feature on the toolbar at any time. So let's start with Kevin and then go to Rich. I'm curious if you could speak to your utilities' approaches to rate increases, how you strike a balance between keeping rates affordable and covering the needed infrastructure improvements.
It's a big question. Um, and it's a tough balance to strike, certainly. At American Water, in terms of affordability, our goal for all our customer bills is 1% of median household income. But when you look at like rate increases over time, it's a pretty standard process. It's not simple. I mean, if anybody on the call has been through rate school or works in rates, you know that there's a lot that goes into it. But really, rate increases are meant to cover needed infrastructure improvements. And the balance of keeping it affordable is making sure, to me at least, is making sure you're being proactive about it. Because if you are waiting to increase rates to cover that, if you haven't increased rates for 10 years, like some municipalities I know of, your system's going to start failing. And when your system starts failing, those repairs, those upgrades become much more expensive. Not only that, but once you start dealing with water quality concerns, with main breaks, the community is not going to trust the service that you're providing. And if they're not trusting it, they're going to the alternative, which is bottled water. And for that household that, is where the water rates aren't affordable, certainly bottled water is going to be a lot less affordable for them. So I think for us, it's being proactive. It's also about understanding what projects you're taking on. At New Jersey American Water, we have a focus on a lot of projects we do The goal is to either reduce energy costs, improve our efficiency, lower O&M, and doing those things helps keep that balance where your rate increases are at a little bit more reasonable level.
Yeah, and Rich, what does that look like for Clinton?
Sure. In the government world, it's slightly different. Obviously, our regulations are a little bit different than the investor-owned, but the concept is the same, to provide the best service at the lowest cost. The downside to the government side of things is the process we have to follow. It's a little bit more cumbersome at times. Things that private industry can do immediately, we have a larger process to follow. However, we've had a very good governing body here over the last 10 to 15 years where they understand that, for lack of a phrase, this is the cost of doing business. If we want to provide safe water to people, we don't have a choice. We have to make certain upgrades, certain efficiencies. To what Kevin said, whenever we make an improvement in our system, we do look at efficiencies. Change this pump, change this motor, save on electricity. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when these monster pumps are running 24 hours a day, they use quite a bit of electricity. Our process that we've looked at over the last 10 years is to have incremental increases annually. Sometimes it's received well, sometimes it isn't, but we have quite a bit of public involvement when we do that. We don't do it in a vacuum. Our consulting engineers have presented to our elected officials the pros and the cons to making such increases, and we hold public hearings just to get involvement and feedback from the people. And while nobody wants increases, they understand that if they want clean, safe water, this is what we have to do. So it's a delicate dance between the politics, the finances, the operational cost, etc., as well as planning for the future. As anyone can attest, probably Kevin as well, what costs $1,000 today costs $500 10 years ago. So everything is going up, and I don't see it going down anytime soon.
Yeah. Eleni or Christina, I'm curious, you both work with a number of different utilities, and do you see the size of the utility rate base impacting affordability?
Yeah, I mean it absolutely can for sure. But I think that's also why, we encourage, cooperative measures when possible, just to kind of keep that, whatever they can do to kind of increase any potential sort of economies of scale there. But yeah, it is a lot more difficult when you're talking about a system that only has, 1,000 connections or less. There's also fewer costs, but it's still a big asset that the system is owning and running.
I would say that everything is proportional and relative. A small system may not have as many miles of water mains that they need to worry about. PFAS implementation costs the same no matter what size you are. So obviously that is something that needs to be considered for what it is. More assets, more money, bigger the system, higher the volume of assets. Based on some of the funding and affordability, we're using the word affordability in a different context. The state revolving fund defines affordability on the basis of mean household income as it relates to the state's average, unemployment change, as well as population change. Whereas affordability in this context is the number of customers that are bearing the costs of these improvements. So on a state level, we want to make sure we bridge that gap, because just because the mean household income in a specific district or area is above the state average, I mean MHI, but there's only 200 customers that have to, take on PFAS implementation. At what point is it disproportionate where the customers there have to pay more to address these? So similarly, on the larger scale of systems, the size of the plants that they have to implement treatment for is going to cost a boatload more to do those improvements than a small system. So for the state revolving fund offering $2 million of principal forgiveness for any system in the state at 100% principal forgiveness, it may make a very small system whole, with everything they need to do to implement that PFAS treatment, including a new well house or for treating what's necessary, whereas $2 million is nothing to the $50 million the Passaic Valley Water Commission will have to implement. So the end theme is it's relative and it's truly a similar burden to all water utilities across the state. Educating the customer base is the only avenue to make sure that everyone involved is aware of what the needs are.
Yeah, I want to get more into that communication with customers. But before we do, just talking about utility size, we have one poll for the audience to kind of gauge what you all know about the landscape in New Jersey. It's anonymous, I promise. We aren't secretly giving you a grade. But Liz, if you would launch that poll, um, as of 2023, there were 557 community water systems in New Jersey, and what percentage of those are classified as small, which is serving a population less than 3,300? Um, I'll let the answers come in for a second, and then we can share those results and just see. But I think this helps us to get a sense of the landscape for the conversation. All right, so then I think we can share those responses. Um, so far, we are, yeah, perfect. 35% are correct. It is 60% of the water systems in New Jersey are small systems. That's 334. So I think that just, like I said, helps us get a landscape for the conversation. But Rich, you mentioned this before briefly about communicating with customers about rates and affordability. I'm curious, what have been some successful strategies for Clinton as you've done that?
I think the most successful strategy is to show the public the actual costs and the projected costs. What we have done, we're very thankful that our consulting engineers were able to come up and work with the town to say, these are your current costs, these are your future costs, these are the current rates, these are the future rates. People don't want to hear your rates are going up. They want to see where it's going. So when you have a projector or everything's projected on the wall and everyone can see, well, it's going to cost $30 million over the next 10 years to be compliant with these new regulations. They may not like it, but they can understand it better. Um, the worst thing in the world I found in the public world is saying you don't know in a public meeting. So you spend quite a bit of time to make sure you have all that information, and you'd be surprised. We've had packed rooms before where everyone is left happy with an increase. Um, so that's the biggest part. Get them involved early on in the process, not after it's done.
Yeah. Kevin, I know New Jersey American has a really robust communications program with your customers. What similarities or what else have you guys seen in communicating with customers?
Yeah, I mean, we get out into our communities as often as possible, and it really is just trying to educate the public on what is happening behind our doors, right? I think a lot of the public doesn't understand how complex it is. Rich mentioned earlier just the pumping costs. People don't realize how heavy water is and how much it costs to just transport it. I see it a lot in my part of my job is doing main extensions for sometimes single family homeowners. And I tell them how much ductile iron pipe costs and their jaw drops. There's so much information that the public doesn't understand. So it's really important for us to get out there. There's a lot of partner organizations that do some great work. Um, American Society of Civil Engineers comes out with a report card every year on infrastructure in the US. Drinking water got a C minus. And while C's get degrees, doesn't really work in the water industry, right? So we got to do a lot better than that. And things like that help educate the public, help them understand that yes, we need to invest in our systems. This is a lifeline for everyone. So getting that C minus up to an A, that's our goal. And when people understand it that way and they can understand, yeah, it is going to cost money, but you're getting a high quality product. That is what we are aiming for.
Christina, as you have worked with different utilities, do you, what kinds of communication do they do with their communities? Is that harder for the smaller systems that have the less personnel to do that?
Yeah, it definitely we find that, even when we bring it up the first time, there's a little bit of resistance because it just feels like another thing that's added to someone's plate. We want to take that burden off as much as possible. A lot of times we tell our utilities, truly the lowest hanging fruit with the most access is going to be putting information on your website about, your system, what the system's needs are, et cetera. I will say we've also kind of been using the regulations, lead service line, PFAS, as a way to kind of galvanize the utility or the community more with engaging with their public, because they are getting questions from their public about, oh, how are you addressing this? And we're saying this is a great opportunity for you. Hey, maybe you haven't been transparent with them in the past, but now they're coming to you. They're asking, how do we put this plan together? So we'll help out with, flyers. A lot of the small systems, because it's a small community, they're very, they still go to their town hall, to pay bills, to pay taxes. And so we encourage, okay, do you have information out when they're coming to pay their tax bill, right? Kind of, it seems really small, but it has a pretty big impact. And, it's things that as kind of a secondary piece of staff, we act as to kind of push that forward and help them out with that. But it's tough, they're doing too many things in a day. They're not going to want to also work on an extra thing that doesn't seem to be a priority.
Is the communication then about any affordability programs a separate issue, or does that kind of go along with that for any of those utilities?
Well, that would mean we still run into a lot of problems with utilities just not wanting to raise rates at all, especially these small systems. So yes, ideally it would, but we just haven't quite gotten to a point where we can
Hmm.
encourage them to, if that's an issue that they're going to run into, how do they talk about it? So
Yeah.
it's in progress.
Eleni, have you seen with your clients that kind of communication around affordability programs or any other strategies in communicating with customers?
So first, I'd like to say that all of us are going to get a 20% increase on our energy bill from our electric utilities. And I was never given the option to opine if I care for that or not. So the courtesy we're offering in educating the public of what the water needs are is almost going above and beyond what is the level of service from other utility providers. Having said that, I believe in complete transparency with the public when evaluating a rate structure. As a consulting engineer, we draw the conclusions based on facts. We have the summary of the assets as mandated. Well, some of the small systems are not mandated by the Water Quality Accountability Act. However, it's good management practices to have an asset management plan and know where the needs are at what time they're due for replacement. So using the asset management plan as a best management tool for a water utility, regardless of their size, there's a funding section in that where you need to prove that what you have just evaluated can be sustainable financially through the utility's rates. So when we present our rate analysis to a water utility, we remind everyone, elected officials, what the assets are, what the system is comprised of, the regulations that force them to take attention to these assets, such as a 150-year life cycle on your water mains. You cannot approve developers to redevelop in your municipal boundary because you have unaccounted for water. That is a direct reflection on, the water main replacement project being a necessity. Identifying the critical aspects of, which asset would be critical if it failed, which asset is more likely to fail, to prioritize and control this chaos of what comes first, and then deduce it to a funding program, if you were to take on this capital improvement as a financial lien on the utility as a loan, or if there is principal forgiveness or grants available, et cetera, factor that into the recipe to then have the output of what the system needs to survive. Then you also take into account all the neighboring systems to be self-aware of how low your rates are. Kevin, we always use New Jersey American Waters as how high the rates can get for a small utility. There's a reason these rates have not been increased in 10 years. And there's a reason why New Jersey American Water has rates that look like the differential is astronomical. It's not. That's due diligence. And it's been slowly increasing over time. So New Jersey American Water has to be on top of their rates. That's the discrepancy. But doing a neighboring evaluation of where your rates are compared to your neighboring systems, it adds a little bit more of awareness to the local officials as well as the customers as well.
Yeah, the replacement rate is great. I mean, you say 150 years. I know systems are way longer than that. American Water, New Jersey American Water is one of the lowest, in the state. It's like I mentioned earlier, it's about being proactive. If you can be proactive about it, it's going to lower your costs in the long run.
I'm curious if anyone has seen challenges come up recently with the impacts of aging infrastructure and climate change or new treatment required for emerging contaminants, and the proactivity that you thought you had planned for being challenged by that.
I think it's 48 billion is AWWA's estimate for PFAS. PFAS, just PFAS, not anything else, just PFAS, 48 billion in capital improvements. So yeah, that does throw a wrench in literally everybody's plans. It's a huge number. And it's frustrating to see, like, obviously, all right, we need to treat for PFAS. We need to treat for all these other things. States coming in with new regulations, federal government's coming in with new regulations, and we're all for it because we want to provide the highest quality drinking water to our communities. But the flip side of that is that funding from those agencies has not increased proportionally. Funding from the federal government peaked in the 70s and just has plummeted since then. And yes, the IIJA has increased it a little bit, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. And that gap has to be paid for somewhere, and that goes into rates.
We're similar in that aspect, not the same dollar amount, of course, but we're in the 30 to 40 million dollar range, probably for PFAS over the next 5 to 10 years. And 30 to 40 million may not be a lot for American Water, but for a medium-sized system, it's huge. We're definitely not as large a system, obviously, as compared to some of the parts of American Water, but the concept's the same. PFAS is PFAS. You have to treat it. There's only a handful of ways it can be treated, and there's only a handful of companies in the country that can provide that. I know what I'm doing when I'm retiring. I'll tell you that it's getting involved with PFAS treatment. But it's the same headache, just a different pot of money.
Should have invested in carbon a couple of years ago, right?
Got that right, yeah.
And by the time you get around to it, the federal government will say, okay, maybe not 4 parts per trillion. Let's go back up to 10.
I wouldn't be disappointed if that happened, though. I'll be honest.
Yeah, so then how does funding play a role in that? What is the impact of using SRF on your rates or your ability to get those projects done?
That's where I was on the panel for New Jersey Future last month on debt is not a bad word. The state revolving fund. I had clients that needed a funding mechanism to advance capital improvements, and through those clients, it forced me to become proficient in what the program requires. That was 10 years ago. Since the pandemic and through the bipartisan infrastructure law, the state of New Jersey received $1 billion towards infrastructure. The DEP decides how to prioritize principal forgiveness packages. You could either get principal forgiveness based on your affordability score on the function of what I mentioned earlier, MHI, unemployment rate, population change. And if you do meet that affordability, which out of the 60% of the small systems, I don't know what the percentage would be that meet that criteria, but there's 124 municipalities that meet that criteria in the affordability spectrum of state revolving fund. There's a tier 1 and there's a tier 2. Tier 1, you are less fortunate financially, more fortunate in receiving more available funds. You can get up to $3 million. Well, that's state fiscal year 25. So let's switch to effective July 1st, state fiscal year 26. A system that meets affordability can receive 100% principal forgiveness up to $3 million for water system improvements, 50 to 80% principal forgiveness on lead service line replacements, and absent of affordability, you're eligible for 3 million, 100% PF towards PFAS treatment. You can tap into any of those buckets in any given state fiscal year at the same time. So it's not one funding category per system per year for the lifetime of the system. No. If you tally all that up, you could easily get up to, as a tier 1 affordability system, you can easily get up to $10 million plus in principal forgiveness to address those needs. Lead service lines, PFAS, water main replacement. If you're taking on the affordability category funding, you can take on a lower ranked project. Ranked project means the score that your project receives from the state revolving fund as it meets their ranking methodology. So there's money there. Now, under-resourced systems don't have the money to get the money. Christina made that point earlier. That's where EPIC comes in. That's where New Jersey Future also partners up with EPIC. There's also technical assistance offered through the DEP. But that really builds the character of the system. Either we sit and complain that there's no money available and I can't get to it, or we utilize the resources that are available to you and you get to the money.
Christina, how have your the utilities that you've worked with, how has the going through the SRF program impacted their rates, their customers, their ability to serve the communities?
Yeah, so far for, to Alani's point, it kind of depends on what the project is that they're going for. For the small systems that are going to the SRF for lead service line replacement or the PFAS treatment, for the most part, the project costs come in at, just under or just at that sort of cap, principal forgiveness cap, which is great, right? So that means that this regulatory requirement isn't going to have a huge impact that, on rates long term. Where we find that that's not always the case is just for the general maintenance that's been deferred, because they're not always going to then get the principal forgiveness. And because there has been like that deferral of maintenance, there's a lot of work that has to get done. But even without the principal forgiveness, the state revolving fund is still the best deal in town for them as far as keeping rates affordable. We really try when we work with communities that, get a little bit, I don't want to, I guess, spooked, so to say, by the fact that they're not getting principal forgiveness. We try to sort of reason with them about, this isn't getting any cheaper. Rich mentioned that, right? What was $500 a few years ago is now $1,000, and that's only going to continue. So, we try to map it out for them and just say, yes, this is the impact on your rates, but this is why. And, you're making this investment. But for the regulatory requirements, I will say, like for the small systems, PFAS and LS, lead service line replacement, it's a good deal. Small systems should be going to the water bank now to take advantage.
I think Eleni said it earlier about larger systems and the impact of that principal forgiveness is like the ratio is small compared to the size of projects that we have to install, but it's still dollars. It still is important, and every dollar that we can save through principal forgiveness or low interest loans does have an impact. It just, probably has a larger impact on Rich's customers than ours. The $3 million principal forgiveness for PFAS. Well, yeah, 50 million, 100 million for the project it's a small ratio. I would love to see the iBank consider some changes to that. It would definitely impact our communities. We serve a lot of disadvantaged communities, and they have every right to those dollars as other disadvantaged communities.
I will add to that. I was part of the team that authored a position paper to the DEP from the lens of a large utility, Passaic Valley Water Commission, making the plea to the DEP to do a little bit better in doing an equitable distribution of principal forgiveness that's being offered in the state of New Jersey. And we had a meeting with the commissioner to discuss that as well. And the ongoing debate is the state needs more money. The DEP and the iBank are not the stakeholders to do that. They get what is received at the state level and now disperse it. So the question then becomes, am I looking at the quantity of systems that this program reaches with principal forgiveness, or am I looking at the volume of customers that this program reaches? There's a huge difference, right? So the smaller the principal forgiveness caps, the more systems can benefit from that principal forgiveness offered by category. Whereas if I base it on volume of customers served, that tips the scale where the principal forgiveness offered for New Jersey American Water, for the Passaic Valley Water Commission, based on volume, the program will run out of money. So those are the things where collectively, when there's a needs survey, when you have elected officials that are part of the decision-making process to increase rates, have that dialogue with the legislation in New Jersey to advocate that more money needs to come to New Jersey for them to be properly distributed. New Jersey's overtaxed. Board of Eds gets 70% of the taxes, property taxes. So any thought of another increase is making people panic. But I love how my bill is going to go up by 20% for having my HVAC on in the summer months and had no say in it. So at some point, we need to do what's best for the infrastructure and pull the Band-Aid and bring the rates where they need to be.
Yeah. As we are talking about the SRF and funding opportunities, just a reminder for anyone, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. But I'm curious about the actual process then of using SRF and going through that, especially the different experiences for larger utilities versus smaller utilities. So Rich, maybe what has been some of the challenges of that, or what have been some of the easiest parts of the process for you guys?
I remember when we did it the first time, it was very cumbersome. It can be a very intimidating process when you look at it the first time. There's a lot of milestones, there's a lot of applications, there's a lot of procedures, and a lot of smaller systems say, it's too complicated, it's not worth it. We have a very proactive consulting engineering firm, and they kind of said, look, let's seriously look into this. And once we looked into it, we realized after the first time, it's not as bad as people think, because a lot of the things you can use from one application to another. Once you get into that process, you need involvement and buy-in, quite frankly, not just from the local elected officials you work with. You need buy-in from the people at the local level that help administer that. It's not just, okay, let's apply and walk away. There's things that the municipality needs to do to move the application forward. So you need someone who's familiar with the process, who can help, whether it's with your in-house or consulting engineer to move them forward. The other positive thing with this is if you budget properly, I think it's a fantastic program. And what I mean by that is, say, and we've probably done this 20 times now, we base our rates assuming we're not going to get any principal forgiveness. If we get principal forgiveness, that money can then be used to either pay for capital projects entirely without assuming any more debt, pay for other improvements or purchases within the water department without incurring additional debt or offsetting operational costs. So while it might say your rates are going up X dollars, you might not need that full rate increase initially, but you sure get the bang for the buck on the back end by having a nice surplus that you can use to proceed with other things without having to borrow money. So once you go through that hurdle, it's intimidating at first, but it's really not that bad once you get used to it.
Yeah, I second that one. It is intimidating at first. I think that's the benefit of working for a large company like New Jersey American Water is we have 4 different project managers doing iBank projects right now. So I'm on step 2. I walk over to my colleague and I say, "Hey, you're in step 3. What did you do?" And they get to warn me about all of the pitfalls for me to avoid, just like the project manager before them did. So, you have that resource level. I have a capital program team with multiple members that are going to do all of my invoice submittals. They do, all the payment stuff, all the loan stuff. They take care of that. I have a project that's customer facing. I have a communications team with 4 members on it that can spearhead that effort. So just those resources make it a lot easier to jump into the process for somebody that, I have one project right now. When I started it, I was kind of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? But having those resources directly surrounding me makes it much more approachable. It is still, even with all that administratively burdensome, there's a lot of check boxes, a whole lot. But I mean, that comes with free money, right? If you want millions in principal forgiveness, you got to check all the boxes, and there's a lot of them. That's kind of like my issue with it is sometimes I got my contracts in, I have every specification in, I submit it, and then I get a kickback that, oh, well, I actually needed my own certification for American Iron Steel or my own certification for, prompt payment. And even though I had this language in my contract, and it's when you get into that back and forth of saying, okay, I submitted this, but now I need this. Now the DEP's got to go to this, and I got to do this. That's when your schedule gets slowed down. So I would say don't expect your iBanks projects to move at hyperspeed, but it is definitely worth it because it is a fantastic program. And every time I talk to the members of the DEP and the iBank that work on this, they are the most helpful people. They are always picking up the phone when I call them. I've probably annoyed them a little too much with how much I call some of them. I've gotten to know them pretty well at this point, but they are really here to be a resource. So if you are applying for an SRF, whoever your contact is at the DEP, give them a call. It's the best way to get things going. Sit down with those members. They will be there. They want to help.
Christina, beyond that advice for just to reach out and call, what other advice would you have for others entering the program or starting the process for the first time?
Yeah, for any of the communities we work with who are first time users of the SRF, we always say contact them and set up a pre-meeting, just to understand, what your funding package might be, understand, what the steps are going to be. We really encourage that. And as Kevin mentioned, I mean, the folks that work at the water bank are truly so nice and accommodating and helpful. They really will take the time out of their day to kind of help and walk these systems through the process. Because yeah, it is totally intimidating the first time you go through it. But there are a lot of resources out there to help you out. And I will say, like, for the small systems, we basically act as like we do everything on the application for them, because usually we're working with a community where it's the one part-time person working there 1 or 2 days a week, and they don't have time to go in and submit everything in the application. And so we get everything together for them, and then they go and they submit it when they have the opportunity, right? But yeah, really, really reaching out to the folks at the water bank, I think, is my biggest piece of advice.
Yeah, that's great. Eleni, do you have any other advice that you would offer?
So during the Water Quality Accountability Act, there was also a time at the Water Bank program that they ran out of money and they froze all project certifications. Since then, they went back to a ranking priority. Then the bipartisan infrastructure law came in, and now it's rolling applications, business as usual. Come in, come all, and get your project done through the program. So, there's been a hiring blitz at the DEP, and there's new individuals reviewing. Give some caution to things that may require conversation before you start executing, the requests coming from the DEP. Be personable, um, and understand there's a human on the receiving end of this. It's like if you're annoyed at Verizon, don't take it out on the salesperson answering the phone, right? Have a conversation. And the other note that I would inform anyone on this call going through the program, the federal government printed money to offer these infrastructure stimulus packages. The benefit of doing so is to stimulate US economy. And this was done years ago. This is a bipartisan infrastructure law, right? So it's not one administration versus the other, it's bipartisan. In doing that, we need to build America by buying American, and we need to make sure American iron and steel provisions are in place. Do they slow down your project? Yes. Can we own it that it's for the betterment of our country? Yes. Own it. Don't argue. That's the program. And in accepting that, put in your own provisions and contingencies that the EPA is also working through the first round of waivers. Your delays will be significant. But again, if you're receiving principal forgiveness, it's worth it. If you're getting to finance the total project at half the interest of the going banking, bond market rate, it's worth it. But have these items identified as you start a project and acknowledge the preparedness that your team needs to have in getting the pertinent approvals and continuing a project within the compliance of the program without having an issue.
Yeah, that's great. There was an audience question that I think is a good one, a little bit tricky. So I'm going to just, if anyone has any insight here, but talking about the balance between reducing overall rate pressure through loan forgiveness and these types of funding versus reducing affordability stresses for specific households in your service area through assistance programs like that. How does someone go about figuring out that balance?
So I'm going to reference, if anybody is familiar with Manny Teodoro and his research, his pillars of affordability. So he talked about different ways to make sure your utility is affordable overall. Household assistance programs, direct assistance programs are not the number one priority. Running your system responsibly, you know, investing in your infrastructure, making sure you're providing the required level of service, operating efficiently, those are more important than household assistance programs. They make an impact. American Water has some really great programs. We have tiered discounts based on household income, but they are not, the enrollment is not as high as you would think for saying, hey, here's a discount. It's if it's an active enrollment, you're never going to get super high numbers. And if it's a passive enrollment tied to some other state benefit, it's administratively burdensome. So it's not, I don't think it's the best way to make sure that our services are affordable. That's why I would lean on that, overall affordability picture through the work that we're doing that we've talked about today.
I agree. There's a lot of county and state programs out there that'll help offset local utility bills for people, but it's a small percentage on what the actual cost is. Increasing your efficiencies in operation is really the only way you can substantially reduce your costs. Electricity, as Eleni indicated, it's going up, and it's going up for everyone, utilities too, not just you as the homeowner. So making improvements to your operations is a huge, huge benefit to the ratepayer.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we're gonna wrap up here in a second. I just wanted to offer one for any of the panelists, any final thoughts that you might want to have or share, or advice that you would want to share for anyone on the call that's trying to figure out how to best manage their rates, affordability, and infrastructure funding.
My thought would be don't let the intimidation factor and the cumbersome nature of the SRF process be a deterrent. It, I know we said it several times today. It is difficult, but once you get through that process, it's very easy. I know there's a surprising amount of, quite frankly, consulting engineering firms that don't deal with this in this day and age at the municipal level, and it's very surprising to me to do that. Find a good firm that knows the process and assign an employee or employees at the municipal level that understand it. And, it might take 5 years for you to start reaping the benefits, but they will be there.
I think now that there's 2 minutes left in this meeting, I will shamelessly plug that I've been working with Clinton for a very long time. And the company Suburban has been representing the town even before I started working here under Andrew Holt, one of our former leaders of the company. But in stating that the program itself is a good funding tool, that's one thing. And that's what I was saying about the WISE Act that came out, the Water Infrastructure Savings Enabling Act, has a calculator that requires municipal public water utilities that are going to post debt more than $1 million in part of your local finance regulations. You are to prove that you have exhausted the option of going through this program to yield cost savings to your ratepayers. So that's one. It's an online calculator. You can punch in some dollars that your capital improvement is going to be. It tells you what your projected debt service would be and how much you're saving. But before we even talk about the funding aspects of your projects, you have to start at your rates. You have to start at your rates. You have to start at your rates. Educate your elected officials, your governing body, whoever is approving these changes in your utility. Educate the public. Continue to have that outreach and increase your rates, because people need to understand that for 1,000 gallons, if you walk into ShopRite today and you look at the gallons of water that are on the shelves, you can get 1,000 of those gallons for a going rate of maybe $5 in any public utility. So Kevin mentioned bottled water. You're willing to pay $1.99 for one of those gallons, and you're looking at me funny when I tell you I need $5 to give you 1,000 of those. How you communicate to your customers and put things in perspective. When they're talking to you and complaining about your increase and they're holding a Starbucks mug, you can just simply say, that latte cost you 2,000 gallons of water. Perspective.
Yeah. I think that's a great note to end the panel on. So thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and expertise. This was excellent. I learned a lot, and I hope the audience did as well. All right, so the panelists, you can all go ahead and turn your videos and your microphones off. I'm just going to share one slide really quickly, and then we will be all done. But this concludes our session today. Thank you again to our excellent panelists. There will be a recording of this webinar posted to the webpage. You can also find recordings from the first two sessions that if you missed those. And we'll be sharing a resource document with some studies and tools that we referenced today. So definitely go and take a look at that. Registration is open now for session 4, Representation Matters. That will be in September. We'll be talking about how race and gender can create barriers for professionals in our industry. We'll be discussing some very practical issues like access and equity across all levels of our industry. So please make sure you sign up. And with that, I would just like to thank all of you in the audience for joining us and going beyond the surface. We'll see you again next time.